So, in summary, people have power. People tend to, unless they're really reflective on it, they tend to develop a worldview that protects the power that they have, and furthermore, they tend to be blind to the fact that that's happening. So, with that in mind, obviously, I've used examples for myself. I'm sure you can think of your own. And there are many examples in the history of mental health of this happening also. People with power choosing to explain the behaviour of people who do not have power in terms of the problem existing entirely within that person. And there are lots of quite self-serving reasons for them to do this. It's not because they're evil, but it's because they're blind to the power that they have and the influence it's having on them. So, first example is drapetomania. This is the gold standard of examples of this. This is absolutely brilliant. Drapetomania was a 19th century disease, we could call it, or diagnosis, that was suggested by Samuel A. Cartwright, who you can see here, and it was suggested in relation to slaves. Now, without knowing anything else about it, you might think that Samuel A. Cartwright really cares about the welfare of slaves and he's trying to understand, what they're struggling with so he can help them better. You might think differently, though, once you are told that the main symptom of drapetomania is the slave trying to escape It's absurd from our perspective. Symptoms include them trying to escape slavery. So drapetomania basically is an attempt for someone with particular power, a white guy, as we can see here, framing the slave trying to escape slavery in terms of a problem that exists within the slave. It's not because slavery is bullshit and it's a crime against humanity and it's a massive injustice, because to acknowledge that, if he lives in this society that benefits from slavery, to acknowledge that would be pretty threatening to the power dynamics at the time, wouldn't it? So what he's got to do, he's got to place the problem within the slave. Because if it's within the slave, there's nothing wrong with the system, there's nothing wrong with society, there's nothing wrong with how we do things with slavery or anything. The problem's within the slave, and drapetomania is an attempt to do that. Need to emphasise again, though, I don't think Samuel A. Cartwright was deliberately trying to do this. I think, like I said, his perspective, I'm getting out of breath now, I'm getting worked up. His perspective is just skewed completely by the power that he has and his blindness to that power, the lack of reflection over the power. He's naturally going to want to protect it, so he looks at everything in terms of things which do not threaten the power that he and his group, I guess, white people have. Next example. Here we have the man himself, Big Daddy Freud, writing in 1896, suggesting that hysteria may well be caused by sexual abuse. He wrote a paper called The Etiology of Hysteria. Etiology, I think that's how it's pronounced, not sure. Etiology relates to figuring out the cause of something. And he suggested, a lot of his client base that he's basing this idea on, who have hysteria, which was, pretty trendy label at the time. A lot of them talked about being sexually abused as kids. So he came out with this piece of writing. I think it caused quite a stir in Vienna, where he was writing at the time. I think, nowadays, the idea that somebody being sexually abused as a kid might cause mental health difficulties at some point in your life, I don't think that's particularly controversial nowadays. But I think back in the 19th century, this did cause quite a stir. That wasn't a well-known idea. And it's worth pointing out that his client base at this time were women made up of the Viennese aristocracy. So he was kind of implicitly suggesting that a fair amount of the Viennese aristocracy may have been doing a bit of sexual abuse. And I think Freud probably correctly figured out that would be bad for his career to say things like that about very powerful people in his vicinity that could have an influence over the trajectory of his career. So he never spoke about this ever again, as far as we're aware, for the rest of his life. As far as I'm aware, anyway. If anyone is aware of any other information contrary to this, then please get in touch and let me know, because I'd be really interested in that. But yes, I think he realised the implications, realised the controversy, never wrote about this again, and a couple of years later wrote a fair amount about kids actually being attracted to their parents. They're unconsciously attracted to their parents. This is the Oedipus or the Electra complex, depending on your sex, apparently. Quite different implications for that. Next up is masochistic personality disorder, which was given specifically to women who stayed in abusive relationships. I think this is another example of the person with the least power being problematised, because that's the least disruptive to the power dynamics that exist in the society in general. You know, let's blame the woman, or let's place the problem within the woman. She's got a problem, she's got a disorder, rather than the man. That's not seen as a problem. Or you know, why don't we problematize the man, or why don't we problematize the system that creates this kind of shit from happening in the first place? Yeah, this irritates me quite a bit. Mainly, I think, because I work with people with personality disorders on a regular basis, and the framing of personality disorder suggests that the problem exists within the person. Time and time again, people with personality disorders are often seen as a problem. They're often seen as difficult, when the label personality disorder, I think, is awful, frankly, because if you consider, or if you speak with people with personality disorders and you know them well enough to hear about the kinds of things they've been through in their life, you might consider that their personality disorder, or the symptoms that represent what is labelled as a personality disorder, is actually, in many ways, a fairly logical response to the kinds of shit that they've been through in their life. And the personality disorder, again, is a way of framing the person with the least power. In this case, it's very, very obvious. You know, let's frame the problem as existing within the woman who has stayed within her abusive relationship, rather than the man who is abusive. I would say the problem exists within him, and maybe he's had his own shit to deal with, and that's why he's ended up being abusive. But his behaviour is the one that's problematic, is causing harm. So I don't know. I think we should probably focus on him as being part of the problem, and certainly the system as a whole that enables that kind of stuff to happen. That's where we should shine the spotlight in terms of the problem, rather than the woman who's being abused and is probably adapting her behaviour as best she can to give her a chance of surviving. Maybe leaving her husband or boyfriend poses too much of a risk for her. I can't talk about this while being detached from it. It kind of irritates me too much, and I've re-recorded some of these because I found I get too irritated and it shows, but maybe irritation is appropriate. Maybe it's a good thing to be showing that. I'm not entirely sure.